Shalom, Rabbi. Shalom, everyone.
Shalom, shalom, welcome to everyone. So let's begin. The idea of this week's meeting, the title that we sent out was The Metamorphosis of Sorrow from Joy. And here I wanted to, and here we say Lidayak, to be very specific that the title is purposely Metamorphosis of Sorrow to Joy, not from sorrow to joy. The reason being that in it's not a transformation, it's not a conversion of sorrow to joy, but that the joy is that we'll be talking about is actually embedded in the sorrow. So what are we talking about? Well, this week we had Tisha B'Av, which of course is sorrow. The end of the week of Shabbat is, of course, Shabbat, and the Parshat is Ve'et Hanan, which has a lot of very special items in it. It's also the 15th of Av, which is a particularly joyous day. We won't go into now why it's a joyous day. That show will be covered in the weekly email. To go into all of it is maybe a little bit time consuming. But the idea being that within the sorrow itself is embedded joy. And it reminded me of a story. Now, I don't remember all the details, but I have to explain one thing. Our daughter is visiting from America with 4 small children. And so if you may hear a little bit of competition in the background, normally I would say I apologize. I don't apologize because it's it's rejuvenating. What's especially enjoyable is that it's not our responsibility. They cry, somebody else takes care of them. Somebody else changes diapers. Somebody else feeds them. There's somebody else. We just get to enjoy. So in any case, if there's a little bit of competition in the background, that's what it is. And the story that I was reminded is before the Holocaust, there was a kind of, it may have been an argument or difference of opinion or something between 2 Jews. I don't know if the perpetrator was a rabbi or a rebbe or something, but in any case, at one point he said to the other person, he said, "You are going to die without your tzitzit." What is it, tzitzit? This is a little bit of tzitzit. If you know that we have talit gadol, talit gadol is the prayer shawl that we enwrap ourselves with on Shabbat and in the morning services. The Torah says that any item of clothing, dafka clothing, that has 4 corners has to have the strings attached to it. Now, I don't know of any item of clothing that has 4 corners. And so in a way, we don't have the opportunity to fulfill this mitzvah. And so there's a certain item, a minhag is an accepted practice that we wear a small item of clothing that has 4 corners, and therefore we have to have these. So that we're able to count to fulfill the mitzvah. Just as a side story, once when I was in reserve duty and out in the desert, the strings tore, which meant that I was wearing a piece of clothing that had 4 corners. I didn't have the tzitzit, so I took it off altogether in order not to transgress the mitzvah. In any case, the one said to the other, "You will die without your talit katan, without the tzitzit." When the Holocaust broke out, he remembered this curse and was particular never to take off the 4-cornered clothing, and he survived. So, in other words, in the curse that this rabbi or Rebbe, whatever the curse in quotation marks, said was actually a blessing. To go in a completely different direction, Elie Wiesel, in one of his books, I think it was Nice, some night, when I think it was his bar mitzvah, he went to the Rebbe, and I think the Rebbe from Satmar, if I remember correctly, and the Rebbe told him, and the Rebbe said to him something to the effect of, there are things that you will see that none of us can imagine. Know that we will see it through your eyes. And Elie Wiesel writes, I was too young or too naive to realize that this was not a blessing. So in other words, we had the side effect, the side mentioned the opposite. In any case, with that in mind, if we come to this very busy week that began with Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, which commemorated the destruction of both the first and second temples, and a number of other tragedies that befell the Jewish people on that date, we come during the week to the 15th of Av, the day of joy, and the portion of Vetchanan. Now, one of the reasons, a deeper reason that the 15th of Av is called a joyous day, very interesting in the Gemara, not to be taken literally, as is known when the Jewish people were in the desert and they had the sin of the spies, and God decreed that those who were alive then, with the exception of Joshua and Caleb, would not enter Eretz Yisrael. So how, the Gemara tells a story like this, how did that generation die out? On the 9th of Av, they would all go out into the desert, and dig their graves. And they would get into the grave and go to sleep. I don't know how anybody's going to dig his grave and go to sleep, but that's what the Gemara says. The following morning, whoever woke up. Whoever didn't, done deal. It's easy to take care of. After 40 years, the remaining Jews went out to the desert. They dug their graves. Next morning, everybody woke up. So, of course, being Jewish, they don't say that, okay, the curse, not the curse, the decree has passed. They said, oh, we must have made a mistake in the date. Obviously, today is not the 9th of Av, it must be earlier. So the following night they went again, and again they woke up. And this went on until the 15th of Av. The 15th of Av is the middle of the month. As you know, the month is a lunar month. The 15th is a full moon. When they saw the full moon, the 15th of Av, they realized that the decree had been fulfilled, had been passed. And therefore, this was the source of the joy of the 15th of Av. So that's one way that the curse or the sorrow of the 9th of Av actually itself turned into joy. When they exhibited the joy, they realized the joy on the 15th, but the source was actually on the 9th of Av when they all woke up. Another example is in the book of Psalms, Psalm number 79. This psalm relates to the destruction of Jerusalem and to the temple, the first temple. The first paragraph, the first sentence reads like this: a psalm by Asaph. God, nations have entered your inheritance. They have defiled the sanctuary of your holiness. They have turned Jerusalem into heaps of rubble. The next 2 or 3 verses are even more graphic. So a question is asked, Rashi asks. The Hebrew says Mizmor l'Asaph, which is translated a psalm by Asaph, but Mizmor means more like a song, a hymn. So they're talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. Why call it a song? Why call it a hymn? It should really be a dirge. In Hebrew, kinah. which Kina is what we say on the fasting days, and on Tisha B'Av, Kinot, we say on Tisha B'Av, the dirges. Shouldn't this really be a dirge, not a hymn? And Rashi explains like this, that within the idea of the destruction of Jerusalem, what did God destroy? He destroyed the stone, destroyed wood. He didn't destroy the Jewish nation. And that is actually the blessing in disguise from the destruction of Jerusalem. It's true, Jerusalem was turned into a heap of rubble. The temple was destroyed, was burnt down, but the Jewish people survived. I'd like to add that the Rabbi interprets this verse in a slightly different way. It says, God, nations have entered your inheritance. The Rebbe says that when we not distribute, when we exhibit, when we disperse, I don't think disperse is the right word, godliness in the world, when we
display?
Display or export in a way, but yes, display and export and keep the ideals of Judaism, which is kindness, goodness, charity, and being a light unto the nations. That fulfills what the middle of the verse says. Nations have entered your. We cause. That's the word. We cause the nations to enter into your inheritance, into your holiness. Okay, in any case, if we go on into this week's portion, which is Ve'et Hanan, and Ve'et Hanan itself is the idea of comfort. The Haftarah that we read begins Nachmu, Nachmu, comfort, comfort. After passing the 3 weeks, after passing Tisha B'Av, we now come into 7 weeks of comfort, the 7 weeks that lead to Rosh Hashanah. So the entire existence, the entire experience of the Jewish nation has now changed from 3 weeks of sorrow to 7 weeks of joy, 7 weeks of anticipation as we arrive to Rosh Hashanah. And so that's the idea. This Shabbat is called Shabbat Nachmu, the Shabbat of comfort, because of the Haftarah, which begins Nachmu, which means comfort. Within Ve'et Hanan itself, there's a passage towards the beginning that's called Ki Tolid Banim, which means when you have children and grandchildren. This is a section that we read on Tisha B'Av. As you can imagine, it's not very encouraging, let's say. And to read it on, anything that's read on Tisha B'Av is not going to be very encouraging and not very enlightening. But the beginning, which I have here, in Deuteronomy, chapter 4, verses 25 and 26. And I'll read part of it. I left out certain parts because it's too much to try to remember the whole thing. It reads like this: when you have children and grandchildren and are long established, remember this, long established in the land, and you become corrupt and do evil in the eyes of God, your God, provoking him to anger. I, God, invoke heaven and earth today as witness against you that you will speedily and utterly perish from the land. And you will not endure in it, you will be utterly destroyed. And that sounds pretty severe. How can we look at these 2 verses and even imagine that inside this there's goodness? Well, Rashi comes to the rescue. Rashi explains like this: what we said, and are long established, right? We said we have children, grandchildren, and long established. In Hebrew, the word is vinoshatem. Now, in Hebrew, we have what's called gematria that assigns a numerical value to each letter. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, and so on and so forth, to 1 to 9, and then 10 to 100, and 100 to 400. Now, the numerical value of Benoshatem is 852. So essentially what God is saying here is that after 852 years, you are going to be expelled from the land. Well, there's one little problem. Am Yisrael was expelled not after 852, but after 850. So the prophecy didn't come to fruition. So what happened here? Rashi says like this: because God didn't keep the first part of the prophecy, the curse, and exiled the Jewish people after 850 years, and not 852 years, that it kind of alleviated him, or resolved him, released him from the responsibility of keeping the second part of the prophecy, the part that says, you will not endure in it, but you will be utterly destroyed. And so within these verses, these extremely critical, extremely I can't think of the word, diabolical prophecy, because God didn't, within the prophecy, God already didn't keep the part that says that they'll be exiled after 852 years. He was relieved or resolved from the second part of the prophecy of utterly destroying Yisrael. If we talk about the Et Hanan, the Parsha, there are several other things. First of all, we recall a second reading of the Ten Commandments, and we also read the Shema Yisrael. I'm going to leave the Shema Yisrael for the end, because I hope we have a little bit of time. I'll tell you a very moving story regarding Shema Yisrael. But in the few minutes we have left, I want to bring another idea of this metamorphosis from sorrow to joy that's brought in the Midrash of Parshat V'etchanan. And very briefly, the Midrash says that the king had a son, a prince, and all the hopes were on the prince. He was a fine, and the prince went his own way, which was diametrically opposed to what a prince should be. So in the end, they said, well, how do we have to punish the prince, or at least get him back into the actions that a prince was going to be the leader of the people should take. And so the Midrash says that there were three teachers, mentors, and they asked each of the three what to do. So the first one says, well, we have to put him in chains. That's really quite diabolical. In chains, and not only chains, but the weight of the chain should be 100 litra. I don't know how to translate litra. I have no idea how much that is. Litra, in the time of the Gemara, was a weight of silver. So it gives a little bit of an idea. Obviously not very, very heavy, but still 100 of these is going to be a pretty thick, heavy chain. The second teacher says, no, we don't need 100. 12 is enough. The third teacher says, no, wait, one liter is enough. So now what's going on here? We want to bring the prince back into proper conduct, bring him back into the fold, so to speak, and we're chaining him. And the whole difference of opinion is whether it's going to be 100 liters, 12 liters, or 1 liter. Even more than that, surprisingly, the Oto Midrash, the same Midrash, says that who are these three mentors? It's Moses, King David, and Jeremiah. Now, this is really surprising. And the Midrash explains that Moses, why does he say it's so heavy, the chain? Because Moses takes the entirety of the distress, the entirety of the pain, the entirety of the disaster that Am Yisrael is about to face. That's the 100 of these litras. King David came much later, and he said, no, it's true, the distress. But God says, God will answer you in your day of distress. How long is a day? A day is 12 hours, so 12 liters is enough. Jeremiah says, God will answer you in your time of distress. Time is 1 hour, and so therefore 1 liter is enough. Up until here, that's the Midrash. How can you explain what's going on here? Well, Chassidut explains that the idea of the chaining is to prevent us from escaping. In other words, that we must cope, we must deal, we must face our environment, even if it's challenging, even if it's difficult, even when distressed, even when there are, as we just mentioned before, tragedies. We have to face it. The chains prevent us from escaping. What kind of escape? Well, anything that we have to deal with, especially if it's difficult, especially if it's negative. Our first reaction will be denial. It's not for me. I didn't do it. It's too difficult or whatever. Excuses. Who am I? What can I do with it? If we go to something more extreme to try to escape, drugs, getting drunk. Chassidut goes even deeper. It says, no, we must not only escape from our environment, we can't escape from ourselves. We must recognize the strengths, the powers, the abilities, the capabilities that God has given us. And the whole idea is the chain is to prevent us from escaping. And that's the idea behind this midrash. Moses said we need a lot. Why? Because at the end of the Am Yisrael was in the desert, the highest level. Moses, whose complete truth, no compromising, no giving in. For him, he needed 100 of these liters. King David already realized that for Am Yisrael to survive, we need only 12. Jeremiah witnessed the destruction. Jeremiah composed the Book of Lamentations, which we read on Tisha B'Av. He realized that for Am Yisrael to fulfill its responsibility, we only need 1 liter. The chain to hold us into our responsibility, we don't need, he would say, kfiyah, a force from above. We don't need something imposing on us. The chain that's holding us is so delicate that we can fulfill our responsibility very easily. And it's up to us to do. I think we're almost finished. I would like to, if you have a few minutes, I'll very quickly tell the story about Shema Yisrael. In the Holocaust, there was a Hungarian Jew by the name of Kalman. He, with a friend and a third Jew, were running from the Germans. Now, I don't know if they escaped from the ghetto, if they escaped from a concentration camp, if they'd been hiding. I don't know what the situation, how they got there. But Kalman and his friend, who were Orthodox, and this third Jew, who was what's called non-observant, were on the escaping from the Germans at the time that the Russians were coming in. So they knew they were very close to freedom, but still they were in German-held territory. One night they found a refuge in, it was probably some kind of a barn, or dilapidated building, something that was not inhabited, and they hid in the corner or in the attic or loft or something like that. Outside, they hear footsteps. They say, "Oh, the Germans are coming around. We have to be quiet. Darkness at night. Maybe they won't discover us." Sure enough, the Germans came into the building, and as they come up either to this room or the loft or whatever it was, they realize this is the end. Shoot first and ask questions afterwards. They realized that when the soldiers entered their room and they saw death before their eyes, Kalman's friend shouts, "Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad." Shema Yisrael. And as the soldiers were coming in, one of them shouts in Russian, "Don't shoot." It turns out that this officer was Jewish. As soon as he heard them saying Shema Yisrael, he realized they were Jews and not Germans, and they were saved. When they left, Zalman says to his friend, "I have to thank you for saving our lives, for shouting out Shema Yisrael." His friend says to him, "What? I thought you said it. I thought you said Shema Yisrael." Said, "No, I didn't." Then who did? It was the third one, who was in the quotes, the non-observant. He was the one who shouted Shema Yisrael. This is the power of this week's portion. Shema Yisrael. It's what has held the Jewish people for 3,337 years since it was given to us on Mount Sinai. The first thing that a child learns, the last thing that we say, that keeps us together. It gives us the strength, and sometimes it can be life-saving. So, if anybody wants to add anything, questions and comments, we're very happy to hear.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, thank you all for participating, and may the positivity, the positiveness that's represented by this Shabbat leading up to Rosh Hashanah give us a strength and the encouragement to enter this whole period that culminates with Rosh Hashanah, and this should be the beginning of the preparation for a good, new, healthy, happy New Year for all of Am Yisrael. Amen. Ken Yeh Ratzon. Thank you for joining. All keep well, and most important, stay healthy.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very